Hi everybody, Chef AJ here, and I'm really excited to share with you the recipe and how to make my world famous German chocolate cake. So let's get started. So the first thing you always do when you bake is you preheat your oven to the proper temperature. In this case, it's 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you have ever watched any of my television shows or YouTubes, you know that one of the things I recommend in general, but especially for baking, is you go out and get yourself an oven thermometer. They cost maybe $10 at the hardware store, and it's really important. You know, cooking is an art, and you can be improvisational. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to be. I love when people take my recipes and change them and make them your own. But you have to understand that baking is a science, and really, to be precise, you don't want to just measure your ingredients with measuring cups. You want to weigh them, and that's how I got in the habit, and why most of my recipes always give ounces or pounds or both, because that's how you're precise. When you're a pastry chef at a restaurant and you're doing large quantities, everything gets weighed. The flour, the sugar, even the salt, the baking powder, and the baking soda. And I'll give you regular measurements as well. But it's really important that you get an oven thermometer. Trust me, there is no professional restaurant anywhere that doesn't have that oven thermometer hanging. All right, so you always want to do what's called your mise en place. And whatever you do, whether it's cooking or baking, that's a French word. I believe it just means everything in its place. Because you don't want to be trying to make a recipe and then run to the cabinet for the vanilla, and then run to the refrigerator for the plant milk, and then run to the pantry for the flour. So I have here what is called my mise en place. So every single ingredient is not only out, but it's already measured out, and it's going to make the process go very quickly. So what I'm using are silicone baking pans. These come in just about every shape and size you can imagine. They're oven safe to 450 degrees, and you never bake really higher than 350 anyway. And because everything I do is sugar-free, oil-free, and salt-free, but this is where it's important for the oil-free, I like to use these because nothing sticks. And if it tried to stick, you would just go like this. I've had these for years. You can get them at places like Bed Bath & Beyond if there's one near you, but they have them on Amazon. They literally come in every shape and size you can imagine. Springform pans, little hearts, stars. So this is, I believe, the 8-inch. I can't remember if it's 8-inch. I believe these are the 8-inch, and I'm using 3 of them because a triple layer cake is a spectacular presentation. The equipment I'm using really is just one piece, and I'm using a blender. Now, you don't have to use a blender, but what I love about it is that if I'm going to pour the batter, it's just going to be so much easier. You could certainly get a bowl and just do a whisk. I've done it that way when I've done presentations that didn't have it, but I'm actually using my Blendtec instead of the Vitamix because for this recipe, I don't know why it doesn't come out in the Vitamix. It just doesn't grab the flour the way it's supposed to. So I also like the Blendtec because it's got the numbers here, so that's really cool, and it just makes it easier. So I'm starting with 2 cups of non-dairy milk. You can use any kind you want. I always recommend an oil-free and a sugar-free one. Kind of hard to find a salt-free one unless it's soy milk is the only one. I'm allergic to soy, so I use almond milk, and generally I make my own almond milk or hemp milk very easily, and I've showed you how to do that in many recipes. So I've got my 2 cups of non-dairy milk, and pre-measured out, I hope I don't spill it, I've got 1.5 cups of date syrup. Now, I am using the date syrup that is organic and from a company called I Love Date Lady, and I am going to do my best to get you guys a discount code by the time this airs so that you can get either free shipping or a percentage off. And they actually do sell this date syrup at many of the Whole Foods now. And what I like about it is it's organic, which is great, and it doesn't have sugar, because believe it or not, a lot of the date syrup that comes from the Middle East, Lebanon being the largest producer of dates and date syrup, often has sugar added. And so that kind of defeats the purpose of using dates. All right, so I've got that measured out. I always do my liquid ingredients first when I'm using a blender, and now I have unsweetened applesauce. It's 1 cup. I love to get these little organic cups at Costco because if you know me, you know I eat potato waffles with applesauce and onion almost every day for lunch, and it's just easier, but feel free to make your own in an Instant Pot. I've showed you how to do that before. So each one of these is 1/2 cup, so I am putting 2 of them in. There we go. And then we have our, just smelling it to make sure, vanilla extract, 1 tablespoon, and I am using alcohol-free. Okay. So I've got my liquid ingredients, and I'm going to put it on my blender, and I am going to blend. was very quick, just seconds. And the Blend Tech actually said that was 3 seconds. Now I'm going to add my cocoa powder. You could use raw cacao powder if you want. That's has a little bit more caffeine, maybe more antioxidants, but you guys know we need to be eating our vegetables for our antioxidants, even though cocoa has some antioxidant properties. I smell that, you know? So, you know, I had to stop eating chocolate on November 7th, 2010, because it was giving me migraines. So I don't eat it anymore, but there's other ways to enjoy it. Just kidding. But, you know, they say that chocolate is the most craved food in the world, followed only by pizza. So I'm going to put the 3/4 of a cup in. And I am using Valrhona, which is a French cocoa powder, which as a pastry chef in recovery and a cocoa snob is my favorite. If you can't find it online or at your Whole Foods, there's other brands you could use. And if you don't care for dark chocolate the way I did, you know, some people prefer milk chocolate. We were raised Jewish. We kept kosher, so I never had milk chocolate till I went to college. So I've always liked dark chocolate. And people that really like chocolate, you know, the darker, the richer, the less sweet, then you know you're really an aficionado. So there's brands. This one I found at Whole Foods. This is a Belgian brand. It's called Cocoa Metro. It's going to be a little bit more expensive than your Hershey's, but this is a good dark Belgian cocoa powder. And you know what? This is a really decent cocoa powder. This is Hershey's. It's Special Dark Edition. It's really not bad. Now, you want to try to get a cocoa powder that's not processed with alkali, because that's like baking soda, and there's already baking soda in this, but just use what you like. I mean, if you like Hershey's, just use it. No offense to Hershey's. King Arthur has a catalog with actually a black cocoa powder that looks amazing in this cake. I'm going to blend quickly again. There we go. Now, one of the secrets that I learned from my mentor in baking, Chef Eric Lechasseur, who used to own Seed Kitchen, a wonderful vegan restaurant in Venice, who has a wonderful cookbook that is desserts only called Love Eric, is that you don't want to overmix vegan baking goods. Even if you're doing it by hand, you just don't, because somehow it just messes it up, because we're not using eggs. And so there's lots of ways to substitute eggs in baking. We're not going to really go into them here because this is the only baked recipe we're going to do. But people use things like flaxseed eggs. I'm not doing that just because it doesn't call for it in this recipe. People use the egg replacer. I've never had success with that. But I learned a long time ago that using apple cider vinegar, which is what we're doing in this recipe, it's the last thing we're adding, somehow makes some kind of chemical reaction with the baking soda that's going to make the cake rise as if it had eggs in it. And I actually learned this in my 20s when I got a recipe actually from Hershey's, from this designer book that I had that talked about a cake that was created in the Depression when they couldn't use eggs and they had to find a way. So that's how I learned that. So now the last thing I'm going to add is the flour. And this, for sure, you don't want to overmix. I measured out my 3 cups of flour and my 1/2 tablespoon each of baking powder and baking soda. Now, because I'm SOS-free, sugar-free, oil-free, salt-free, I'm also flour-free and gluten-free, I use salt-free baking powder and baking soda, which you can often find at Whole Foods and certainly find online. But the truth is, if you're eating this cake, don't worry about the little bit of salt in your 1/2 tablespoon of baking powder and baking soda. So I'm just adding it very carefully because I'm wearing this very nice new pressed chef coat, and the flour would get on it. So there we go. And I'm going to put this in now. Now, I am using a gluten-free flour because everybody seems to be gluten-free these days. When we made this cake at the restaurant, I had to use the flour they had. And by the way, this is the only dessert I ever made at the restaurant that had flour or gluten. But I can do a raw version, by the way. It's going to be, that's really high in fat with nuts, but I can do that. So I am using, because I don't know who's going to get this cake. Well, maybe Gustavo's going to get a little bit, but I'm just using the gluten-free all-purpose flour from Trader Joe's. Now, the flour that we used at the restaurant was barley flour, which is wheat-free but not gluten-free. And sometimes they use spelt flour. They didn't use white or wheat flour, because some people can actually have gluten, but they can't have wheat. So that's what we used. And, you know, don't kid yourself. This is a dessert, guys. And think about what Michael Pollan said, that we have to treat treats as treats. You know, I used to weigh 200 pounds because I didn't treat this as a treat. This was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and dessert for me. So let's not argue about what's the best sweetener, what's the best flour, what's the best sugar, what's the best salt. None of them are foods. They're chemicals we add to the food. Let's not argue about what the best oil is, because there is no best oil. There's no good oil. The point is if it's a treat, it's not going to that much matter what, unless you obviously have an intolerance to a certain thing, which flour you use. I would argue, though, that it's still better to use dates, even date syrup. It's still concentrated, but for me, it just seems to be less triggering. I'm not that I'm going to eat this, but that's just my opinion. But I don't know what to say, what to use if you use granulated sugar, because I don't know. Never did it. Okay, not that I never did it, but now I'm going to blend it again very quickly. That's 10 seconds. And there we go. Everything is fully incorporated. This works so wonderfully in this Blendtec, not in the Vitamix for some reason. I don't know why. And the reason I like doing it in the blender is because I can look at the numbers to see how much to pour. Look at how dark and rich that is. Unbelievable. And by the way, even if you don't like German chocolate cake, I know not everybody likes coconut. This is your basic chocolate cake, guys. This is your birthday cake for your kids. And gosh, it's so rich, it doesn't even need frosting. So we're just going to equally distribute the cake batter on, SpaghettiOs. Guess what I forgot to do, guys? Very important, but that's okay, because we're not going to take it out now. We're going to do it a little bit differently. I forgot to distribute the apple cider vinegar. That is very, very important to the cake rising. But instead of making a mess now and trying to get this out, I am just going to add it to the individual pans. See, isn't it good a mistake happened, Gustavo? Because then they can learn from it. So let me get a little spoon. I think this will work fine, and if it doesn't, we know why, because I made a boo-boo, as they say in French. So I'm just going to put a third.
So this was supposed to
This
be
was supposed
in
to
the
go in the
blender.
blender. As I say, do as I say, not as I do. But you can see it creates little bubbles. And this is what's going to make it rise. So I think it'll be fine. I'm just stirring it in. I recommend that you do it correctly. It was sitting right there, but you know, there's a lot to think about when you're doing on-camera presentations. I think it's going to work fine. So I'm just gently stirring it in to each one. And because we're going to fill this cake and frost it, even if it didn't rise, nobody's going to know. They're just going to think you make thinner layers. So again, it's good that this happened, Gustavo, right? Okay. So now we are going to pop it in our preheated 350-degree oven. You should know your oven, where the hot spots and the cold spots are, and what's the best rack for you. I try to get it as much in the center as possible, not using high or low racks in general.
So you put in all three.
All three, and very careful. Okay, and now I am going to set the oven timer.
And they're on.
So what you can do to make this cake even more decadent is sprinkle it with chocolate chips. You don't have to do this, but the reason I did it is because I'm a texture person, and the cake is smooth, but this gave it just that little bit of crunch. Again, this is optional, and you'd want to sprinkle them on top before you put them in the oven.
So they really don't go in the mixed.
No, because if Gustavo, what happens is if you mix them in, they sink to the bottom, and that's not good. They'll probably already sink either. Like what a lot of chefs do is they kind of toss them with a little bit of flour to get them not to sink, but it's okay if they sink. But I can see that the apple cider vinegar, even though it was added later, work, because I can tell these are always already right. By the way, guys, this is completely optional. This just makes it even more decadent. And if you don't have it...
Can you tell people what kind of chips?
Yes, that's a great question. And as soon as I close the oven, I'm going to tell them and I'm going to show them. So what I'm using today for chocolate is a brand called Sunspire. And these are grain sweetened chocolate chips. Now, if you are gluten intolerant, you cannot use these because they are sweetened with barley malt. Once again, just because something is less bad doesn't mean it's good. It's still sugar. I just find that this is what we used at the restaurant. It was, I don't want to say less sweet. It was just good. It was less sweet because the thing the macrobiotic chefs use it because they said it wasn't sugar. It really is. Sugar is sugar, guys. Oil is oil, salt is salt, flour is flour. You can use any chocolate chips you want. I would recommend, though, that you use one where the cocoa or the chocolate is the first ingredient if you are going to use one with sugar. I know they have chocolate chips now with stevia. To me, stevia is just the most disgusting thing in the world, as is erythritol and xylitol. And if you're somebody that suffers with any kind of GI distress whatsoever, please don't use stevia, erythritol, xylitol. All the GI doctors like Robin Chutkin, I think it is, who wrote Gut Bliss, and I believe Dr. Greger has done a video on this too. They completely disrupt your flora and your microbiome, so don't use those fake sugars. They're just bad news, honestly. And they taste pretty gross, actually. If you like them, it's because you're addicted to them, because regular people or kids, you try to give them stevia, it's gross. So, I'd rather have people use sugar than that stuff. So, you could make your own chocolate chips, date sweetened. I've done it. It's just the most labor intensive thing, where you literally have to pipe each chip on a dehydrator tray and dehydrate it. It's not worth it to me. The other thing you could do is, if you really wanted to, is you could use the 100% cacao bars. They have bars of chocolate and even chocolate chips now that have absolutely no sweetener, and then you would have to sweeten it to taste with your choice of sugar, or in my case, I would use date syrup. But again, this recipe was created at the restaurant using these ingredients, so I'm trying to give you a master pastry class here that people come in person and spend thousands of dollars learning this. You're getting it for peanuts, and I'm just showing you exactly what I did in the restaurant, and this is what we use. So,
Do they make chocolate chip that are gluten-free?
yes, they absolutely do make chocolate chips that are gluten-free, but I've never seen ones that didn't have sugar when they're gluten-free.
All
and again, barley malt is sugar, but you could argue that it's less processed, it's less sweet, and, sugar is sugar. So now I'm going to show you how to make an outrageous chocolate mousse that I call Decadent chocolate mousse, because it is. I've been making this at least since my early 20s. And this is going to be the filling for the German chocolate cake, but you don't like coconut or pecan? Just make it your frosting. You don't have to fill it. It's really, really good. Or it's good as a standalone. So Gustavo said, hey, but the blender's dirty. I did it on purpose because I wanted to show you. I'm so lazy. Since it only had chocolate in it, I'm doing chocolate to chocolate. What the heck? So in the blender, I already have 3/8 of a cup of my non-dairy milk. And to that, I am going to add a tablespoon of alcohol-free vanilla. I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of a good quality cocoa powder. I'm using Valrhona, and 1 box, I believe it's 12.3 ounces of Mori-Nu extra firm. This is important if you want to make a mousse. Extra firm tofu. You don't want to use the tofu that's in water. That's nasty for desserts. You want to use the silken tofu only for desserts, and preferably the extra firm. So I've got that in my blender, and it's okay that it was dirty because it just had a little of the cake batter in it.
Not this.
No, not that. Nope, not that. So I'm going to blend that up, and I'm going to step over here and heat up. I'm going to go over here now, and I have a little pan here with 5 ounces or a cup of chocolate chips, to which I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of date syrup. And I'm going to use medium heat, and I am going to melt this. Now, you have to be really careful when you melt chocolate. If you don't have a double boiler at home, which I really recommend you do if you're not an experienced pastry chef like me, you have to be really careful, because you could scorch chocolate. And if you scorch it and it burns, you have to throw it out. You can't save it. So you could technically melt chocolate in the microwave, but again, it can scorch. So I would never melt chocolate in a pan unless you have some kind of liquid in it like I do. But again, if you have a double boiler, that is recommended. Now, the date syrup I'm using is an organic one from I Love Date Lady. I buy it online because I buy bigger ones, and it's cheaper that way. But I have seen it in most Whole Foods now in the baking aisle, or this aisle with the other sugars. So, I get a lot of people, Gustavo, saying, well, how about coconut sugar? How about agave? It's all bad. It's better if you don't eat any of it. But if you're going to eat it, my recommendation is to use dates. The fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the whole fruit. Agave is probably the worst because it's actually higher in high fructose corn syrup than even corn syrup, and it's metabolized in the liver, so that is just a fraudulent thing, that agave is some kind of health food. So people think it is, and I'll go to places and they'll say, oh yeah, it's sugar-free, but it'll have agave or it'll have stevia. It's not sugar-free. The only thing that's sugar-free is fruit, unadulterated fruit. So look how quickly this melts, partly because the oven is on and this pan was sitting on the oven. So you want to get it nice and smooth without any chips that you can see, but you definitely don't want to scorch it. And if you're worried, just do it at the lowest heat possible. So this happened, oh, look at that. Look how smooth that is. Wow. Okay. So now I'm going to turn this off. And I'm going to pour this into my blender with the other ingredients carefully because it's hot. I'm using a nonstick pan because I don't want to lose any of this. There we go. Alrighty, put this aside. Whoops, didn't get that on me, thank goodness. And again, if you don't have a high-powered blender, this part you could do in your food processor fitted with your S-Blade, but you need one of those two machines. I'm just going to scrape down the sides, make sure I get all the chocolate incorporated. This is so delicious. This will firm up in your refrigerator into a very thick, rich, mousse-like texture, which you could just serve for dessert with some fresh strawberries or raspberries on top. You'll knock your guests' socks off. They will not know that it has tofu. Now, what if you're like me and allergic to soy? You could do this with avocado. There we go. Now I am going to pour it into a glass container.
Do you know how much avocado you would put?
I would use an equal amount.
Okay.
You'd have to taste it though, because you don't want it to taste like guacamole.
Mm-hmm.
I would start with, it's 12 ounces of tofu, so I would weigh it. That's how I do things. I would imagine it was going to need at least one. I haven't done it with avocado, but people have told me they have. So I'm just scraping out every little bit. And while you see this is a little bit liquidy now, that's only because we just made it. This is going to firm up in your refrigerator in just a couple of hours into a beautiful filling or frosting, your choice. That's that. Is that not beautiful? Okay, so there we have it, our decadent chocolate mousse or our filling for our German chocolate cake. And if you want it more pudding-like, let's say you're going to serve it for dessert and a little bit less rich, what you can do is add a little bit more non-dairy milk, but this is going to be really thick. So in the 35 minutes it takes for the cake to bake, you can be making the filling, making the frosting, eating your vegetables. The oven timer has dinged. Ah, it's beautiful. Don't worry about the little bit of cracks. That happened because I added the vinegar later. It's going to be covered up anyway. So I don't like to use toothpicks because that's environmentally not friendly. So I have a permanent toothpick. Stick it in and you can see it comes out clean. Now beware though of one thing. There are chocolate chips in here and they're melted. So if it didn't come out clean, if I go right through a chocolate chip, well, we'll say, oh no, that's not clean. Yes, it is. That's the chocolate chip. But you can see when I hit the cake. So that's perfect. I'm going to turn the oven off. Make sure you always wear oven mitts. And you want to cool this on a rack. So I have 3 of these. They're stackable. One. Never ever want to take it out before it's cool, guys. Never. That's a big no-no. You have to be patient. 2 and 3. Somewhere where the air can circulate. There we go. So once these cool, I'll show you how to take them out and fill and frost your cake. So now I'm going to show you how to make the frosting for the German chocolate cake. And it literally is 3 ingredients, 4 if you use vanilla, which I may or may not use depending on how far away it is from this food processor here, which you will need fitted with an S-Blade. I really recommend whatever food processor you get at least a 14 cup. 12 cups just, too small, especially for my recipes. So what I'm going to do is make date paste, and I use the recipe on page 65 from Unprocessed because it works perfectly in my recipes, which after all I created. You can buy commercial date paste, but it tends to be very hard to work with. The way they made date paste in the restaurant is they put it through like a meat grinder, like that you would make sausage with, like a shower head extruder, and it was just very, very hard to work with. I'd have to reconstitute it anyway, so I just figured it's easier to make my own. It's cheaper. My ratio is 1 pound to 8 ounces. So in other words, I take 1 pound of pitted dates to 8 ounces of liquid, depending on the recipe. Usually I use water because it's free. You need to let them soak until the dates plump up and they become nice and soft and most of the liquid is absorbed. Never throw out the soap water for dates, guys. That's gold. That's where all the sugar went. You can even use soap water, not for this recipe, but in general, use soap water to sweeten things like hot beverages. So I tend to make this whole tub at once, which is a 2 pound tub, because then I always have date paste ready. But if you want to be precise and just make enough for this recipe, you need 20 ounces of dates, and that will make the 3 cups of date paste, which you need. So you dump everything in the food processor. This 14 cup food processor will hold 2 pounds of dates, which is why I like it. Now here's the thing about date paste. If you try to say, well, I'm just going to make a half a cup, no, it won't work. You need at least a pound for it to process. So you process. Always like to at least take it off once. And those of you that know me know I'm really opposed, well, I mean, not opposed for you if it works, but for myself, for weighing and measuring the food I eat. So you're saying, well, why is she giving us measurements? Well, because a pastry chef always measures everything in weight, not in volume, and I just use a postal scale. You know, it's too small to... All right, there we have it. So now, in this bowl, I have already measured out half as much in terms of weight of pecans and unsweetened coconut. This is the texture of the coconut I like. This, I guess, is the medium flake. They have a very fine one, which I don't like as well for this recipe, and a larger flake, so this medium flake works perfect. Make sure you get unsweetened. You can get one that's been defatted a little bit. I don't know how that tastes. And you can use raw nuts or you can use roasted if you prefer. Make sure they're unsalted. And then we are going to add this date paste to it. I am not measuring cups because I know that if I use 20 ounces, I made this cake about 1 million, maybe not 1 million times, but quite a bit, that this is going to be enough. And if you want to add extract, you can. You know, we used to use a little bit of caramel extract, but you know, dates already taste like caramel, so it really didn't need it. So once again, the trick that I teach you over and over to get the last bit off. There we go. Whoopsie. And now we're going to add it and we're going to stir it. This is where you might want to get your food service gloves out to get it really incorporated. If you have any, make sure you get latex free if you're cooking for others, because you just never know. I reuse my food service gloves a couple of times. I wash them, then they're not permanent. So I'll mix this up, but at some point I'm probably going to want to stick my hands in it because it's just easier. Now if the cake was ready, I could probably frost it now, but I still like to put this in a fridge to get it chilled a little bit because it's easier to work with. It is very hard to work with these long sleeves. I should have worn my short sleeve chef coat, but I'm just going to stick my hands in and get them dirty. Well, they're clean, but now they're not. And you just want to mix it all together. Now, what else can you use for this frosting if there's leftover? Well, I'm going to show you really soon in a bonus recipe. But one of the things that you can do, and I will just tell you, is you can use it to coat an apple and make the most delicious caramel apple you've ever taken. You can get a stick at a craft store, stick it in the apple, and then you take the apple and you just pat it over that. You might have to run it through a little bit more coconut just so that you're not getting sticky frosting, or you can just take little apple slices, or if you're really decadent, you can take the smallest amount and put it on your morning oatmeal. OMG, German chocolate cake oatmeal. So we want to get all that coconut incorporated, And this is our frosting, and we're going to be like a bricklayer the way we frost this cake. Okay, so it's ready, and I could use it right now to frost the cake. I really don't need to refrigerate it. You just kind of do patty cake. But since the cake's not quite ready, I'm going to refrigerate it and then show you the final assembly. So now I'm going to show you how to fill and frost the German chocolate cake, and the assembly is a really fun part. You can get the kids involved, and always feel free to use those food service gloves if you don't like to get your hands dirty. So you got to make sure that all your layers cooled, because it's going to be a disaster if it doesn't. Find the plate that you're going to be serving it on, and then when it's cool, you know you'll be able to do this. Ready? Boom. Look at that. Okay, a couple of the chocolate chips stuck, but big deal. This is going to be really easy to clean. And you know, when you don't cook with oil, man, it's so easy. You know, when I was a pastry chef, we had a dishwasher at the restaurant, but sometimes I decided to work late just to get my orders done, and he went home, and I'd have to wash my food processor myself. And we would use things like Spectrum, which was a vegan non-hydrogenated shortening. I mean, I could not, even through the sterilizer, get that grease off the plastic food processor. I'm thinking, because I was still eating oil back then, I didn't become SOS free until 2009, but I thought, my God, if I can't get it off the glassware and the plasticware, what's it doing to my arteries? I really remember thinking that. Anyway, if the layers are not even, I always do the most sturdy one on the bottom. And then I will take my other two layers off as needed. So we've let our filling chill, and boy, this, like I said, is good on its own. This can just be your frosting. I don't think traditionally German chocolate cake has a chocolate filling, but man, you guys, that coconut pecan frosting is just too sweet to have it all the way through. So that's why I like dark chocolate better. When I ate it, it was less sweet. So I'm taking half of the filling, and I didn't let it chill to as thick as it really is going to be because I wanted to get this done, but it's certainly thick enough to frost. This will actually thicken up even more. And again, if you want it thinner because you want to eat it as a pudding, just add more non-dairy milk when you make it. So we just want to get that, and you don't have to worry because you can hide any mistakes with this cake because of the fact of the way we're going to frost it with the coconut pecan frosting. It's going to be incredible. I made this cake recently for my good friend, chef extraordinaire, Darshana Thacker of Forks Over Knives. I made these for her 50th birthday, but I had to go out of town and miss the party. So I was speaking at another Engine 2 conference, and I froze them. These freeze great. What I do is I put them in jumbo Ziploc bags. So then I have my second layer, and you can see how easily this comes out. That's what's so great about silicone. You always want to frost on the smooth layer instead of the cracked layer. And again, you can just use this cake for other things. It doesn't have to be a German chocolate cake. This could be your go-to chocolate cake recipe. That certainly was mine. I used to make an espresso cake, and I would have espresso powder in the batter to do that, and also in the frosting. Okay, I'm going to save a little so Gustavo can lick the bowl, just like we did when we were kids. I don't know if your mom ever let you lick the beater or lick the bowl. Okay, so there we go. And then our third layer just pops right out because I let it chill. Boom. Now, I got to roll my sleeves up for this. Got my coconut pecan frosting. You can see what a nice tall cake this is. It weighs a ton. I mean, normally when I serve this, believe it or not, traditionally a cake is cut into 12 slices. That's what we did at the restaurant because we charged $9. This you got to cut into 20. It's just too rich, and maybe serve it with some fruit. So what I do is I just kind of flatten it with my hand, and I start at the sides, and I just kind of build a wall, a frosting wall, and it will stick. You really do have to do this with your hands. There's no other way. We do the sides first. And you just got to keep moving it around. And don't eat the falling pieces, because what if I need them? And again, I'm going to have to get some water to wet my hands to do the smoothing out part. We're building a wall of frosting. And if you're going to build a wall, that's the only kind of wall I recommend we ever build. Okay, so, you know, if your hands start getting too schmutzy, you know, just wet them, or have even better, if I had a bowl, have a bowl of water nearby. You can always press it on. Don't worry, it's a very sturdy cake as long as you've cooled it. You can do the frosting as thin as you want. It's very, very rich. So if you have the leftover, you can do the bonus recipe if you decide you want to do less frosting. There we go. Or you know what you could do is double the filling recipe and not make a German chocolate cake. Just make a chocolate cake. That's fine. Nobody said you have to do this. Okay. So it's looking pretty good now. See, oops, a little hole right there. So we just stick it in there. You can always make it work. And now the top. I just kind of flatten it like a pancake and put it on. And then I will fill this bowl with water and show you how you smooth it out with your hands. That's why I never worry if it cracks or if it doesn't rise all the way, because I know that I can always hide it with this cake. And so there's a couple different ways to decorate it. One of the things I would have loved to show you, but I forgot to buy whole pecans, is you take one pecan and a little date paste and put it all the way around. And that really helps you know how many slices to make. If you're going to be slicing it, you can put 20, you can put 12, 16, whatever. But I do like to coat it with a little bit of coconut, because that way it's not sticky. So let me just get a bowl with some water in it, so I can show you what to do to smooth out the cake. Here we go. I wish I had worn my short sleeve chef coat. So now with wet hands of warm water, I start moving it around. It's okay, it won't break. You can smush it. You know, be gentle, but firm enough to get the pieces to go together, like you're cementing it. Yes, ma'am. And my sister likes to use food service gloves when she does this. That's okay. Again, you can wet your hand, just very little, and then smooth, smooth, smooth. Get all the pieces to touch together. Now, my sister likes to do a lip. I'm too lazy. I'm going to show you what that is, the lip. If you want to do it, you don't have to. Just depends how you're going to decorate it. So, first thing I want to do is get it smoothed all the way around. I want to make sure that there's frosting everywhere, that you're not seeing any chocolate, that you're not seeing the seam. So doing that with gently wet, warm water hands. There we go. Smoothing out the top so it's nice and flat. So what the lip is, and I'm not going to do it, is my sister likes to kind of use her thumb and sort of create a border like this all the way around. I kind of think it's cute, but it's not necessary, and it's a little bit more time consuming. But that's the idea, is she builds up I mean, we'll do it now. I told you about it. So, but to me, it's just a waste of time, especially when we're doing 30. She likes to do that. And press it in. Okay. So, this is where it gets a little messy, because you're pressing it on the sides and on the top. And again, it's still soft. This isn't going to get hard, so you're still able to fix it. But what this does is it makes it not sticky. And it just gives it a very pretty finish, in my opinion. So you kind of put your hand to the side, spread it in. There's, I don't know how many ounces we're using. I'm sure not more than a couple. This also helps. Nice and round. There we go. Look at that. It's really shaping up. Now you definitely want to keep this cake in the refrigerator, not at room temperature. It's fine to freeze it. You can always slice it up in little slices so that you're not tempted to overeat on it. And take out one at a time. Look at that. And then I can take my finger and get that extra coconut out if I want.
It looks good.
But it looks beautiful. I'm going to wash my hands and then pick it up. And then when it's time, we'll show you what it looks like. Cut. But we're supposed to take it to a play reading tonight. But look at that. This weighs a ton. I don't know how much. It's just like you could get a workout with this. This is a real dense cake. So there we have it. Chef AJ's world famous German chocolate cake.
Yum.
And now you can make it, or you can always buy it from me for 75 bucks. So now I'm going to show you another dessert that I swore I'd never give the recipe out for, because I still sell a lot of them. And this is my frozen peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. This is show-stopping. I normally cannot give you the names of my celebrity clientele because I sign pieces of paper for confidentiality, but because this actress said so on television and in print that she buys this for me. Her name is Heather Graham. She's gorgeous. She's a talented actress. This is her favorite, the peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. It's not difficult to make, but you need 4 different steps and you have to wait in between for layers to chill. So it does take a little bit more time than, you know, just microwaving something. So the first thing we're going to do is the crust, and the only piece of equipment we need is a food processor fitted with the S blade. You cannot use a blender for this, and it's called the S blade because it looks like the letter S. So we're using a springform pan, and this is my favorite one. This is a silicone one. I got this on Amazon with a glass bottom. But I need one that's a little bit bigger for this recipe. This is what they traditionally look like. I got this for about $7 in a restaurant supply store. What silicone pan is, excuse me, not a silicone pan. What a springform pan is one where the sides collapse. So it's great for things like cheesecake. And I'm going to use this one because it's my biggest one, and it's just so easy. It just pushes right back up. Now, you can cover this with a piece of parchment paper or a piece of wax paper if you don't want to wash it, but I don't have any right now, so I'm not going to do it. So there's only 3 ingredients in my crust, and these are the same ingredients in my book Unprocessed for a recipe called Peanut Bites. I'm using roasted but unsalted peanuts, and even though this only needs 2 cups, I'm just going to grind the whole bag. Why dirty my food processor twice when I know that I'm going to need them ground anyway? And I'm just going to pulse. I don't want to over-process because I don't want peanut butter. So, there we go. We've ground this up. And you might even be able to get, I've seen ground nuts, ground peanuts in the store, in the top aisle that says sells stuff for ice cream toppings. So I'm just going to pour this into a bowl because I'm going to need these later for the top. And I'm going to put my blade back, and I'm going to take 2 cups out. I believe a 1-pound bag makes about 4 cups. So 2 pounds out. And now I'm going to grind it even more like a flour. So this is technically a raw dessert in that it's uncooked, but it's not raw in terms of what a raw foodist would think is raw. So now I've processed that into a flour-like consistency, and I'm adding 2 cups of pitted dates. If it's not pitted, you'll know because this will stop the blade. I'm using organic dates that have been pitted, and I prefer the Decadent Nor. I know that people that really like to eat dates like the medjool better because they're sweeter, but they're stickier, and I find that the Decadent Nor work better in my recipes. You process this till almost a ball forms, till it sticks together. And you can see right now it's still crumbly, which means I need to process a little more, and I might have to add a few more dates, but we're going to see. Check it again, and the way you know it's ready is you smush it together to try to make a ball or a cookie, and you can eat this. This is a dessert. And if you can break it apart easily like this, which I call the break point, and there's no crumbles, it's ready to be your crust. You could even add some cocoa powder to this if you want to make chocolate peanut, but we've got enough chocolate in this recipe. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pour it into my springform pan. And if you cannot eat peanuts for any reason, you can totally do this recipe with almonds. So instead of peanuts in the crust, use almonds, raw almonds preferably, and instead of peanut butter, you use almond butter. And I've done that for people that had a peanut allergy or for whatever reason were avoiding peanuts. So you just press it down, and this is your crust. So we're going to stick this in the freezer so that the layer that we put on top, it'll be nice and cold, will freeze even firmer. It doesn't really have to be perfect. It's going to be fine without it, but what I want to tell you is if you do use the vanilla, you don't put it in until it got to that break point. So when I showed you that break point, then you put it in. If you put the liquids in too soon, it won't work. But that's okay. We need the vanilla, and it's not going to make a big deal on the crust. So there we go. We have this nice, beautiful, easy crust, and we're going to pop this in the freezer. So now I'm going to show you how to make the second layer for the frozen peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. And if you're watching this whole webinar, you're going to see it's a little bit similar to the filling we did for the German chocolate cake, or the frosting. It could also be a frosting. We're using it as filling because German chocolate cake, after all, has a coconut pecan frosting. But what's different about it is we are going to use some non-dairy cheesecake because, after all, it is a cheesecake. So in my pan, I have a full bag, 10 ounces, of the grain sweetened chocolate chips, which are right over there. You can show them if you like. And that is approximately 2 cups. So if you use another brand, just know that you would want to use 10 ounces, which is approximately 2 cups. Also realize that if you are using a brand that is sweeter with refined sugar as the first ingredient, you may have to cut back on the date syrup or it might be too sweet. So I'm pouring 3/4 of a cup of date syrup into this. Now, if you have a double boiler at home, please use this unless you're a professional chef, because you don't want to scorch that chocolate. You just want to be very mindful. You never walk away when you're stirring melted chocolate, whether it's in a pan by itself or on a double boiler, because what we want to do is get it into a smooth consistency. I'm using about a medium heat, but if you've never done this, you might want to start off on a low heat. Of course, with a double boiler, the idea is the bottom part of the double boiler just has boiling water, and when that comes to a boil, you're melting the chocolate very gently on top. So here we have it. It's nice and melted. So I'm going to turn it off the heat, and then I'm going to go back to my food processor fitted with the S-Blade and add the ingredients. I have 1 block of tofu, 12.2 ounces. Always use silken tofu for desserts. It's terrible to use the savory kind that's in water. It's horrible. Do not use it. You will be very, very disappointed. If you have to get it online, get it online. But I like the extra firm Mori New best. And then we have 1 cup of a non-dairy cream cheese. This is an almond-based cream cheese. I like to use the brand created by my dear friend Miyoko Shinner. It's called Miyoko's Creamery. If you can't find it by you, use another brand, I suppose. Just make sure it's non-hydrogenated. And you can actually make it yourself. It's really easy using the recipe in Miyoko's book. And I used to do that until she started selling it, because conservation of energy principle. So it's similar to the filling of the German chocolate cake in many ways, but you can see that there's more chocolate in it, and there is cream cheese instead of just tofu. I'm going to add half a pound. That'd be a lot. A half a cup of good quality cocoa powder. I am going to add 1 tablespoon of alcohol-free vanilla. And now I'm going to add my melted chocolate. Now, what's a little bit different than the filling for the German chocolate cake is there's no milk added. So I'm trying to keep this as thick as possible. I don't want it to be pudding like at all. I want it to be really, really thick and luscious. So there's no additional liquids added. So there we go. Not messing up the counter too bad. Oh, get every drop of that chocolate. All right. Oopsie. All right. And now,
Something here on the top.
that's okay. A centrifugal force should make it spin. I think it's always a good idea to scrape the sides down every now and then with a spatula, not with your tongue. It is ready, but I just wanted to get a little few pieces of tofu I saw floating around. So I went and got my crust. You can see how that works, these springform pans. Don't do this until it's nice and frozen. There we go. And now I am going to pour this on top. And then it's going to go in the freezer to set up. So this is sort of like a combination cheesecake ice cream cake. When it's ready, you need to take it out of the freezer about 15 to 20 minutes before. So you'll be able to cut it unless you're really strong, but you don't want to keep it out of the freezer or keep it in the fridge, because I don't use any stabilizers in my recipes like soy lecithin or anything to make it thicker. So now, one of the tricks I would like to teach you is to get every little bit of lusciousness on the blade. And the way to do that easily is to place it back on the food processor, place the top on, and with one quick spin of centrifugal force, we have a completely clean blade. And if we hadn't done that, we would have wasted all that goodness. Now, once I get it out, I'm going to level it off with what I call it's what it is called an offset spatula. You can get them at Walmart for about $7. You can get them at restaurant supply stores or stores that are just for baking. And it just makes a nice smooth top. It's beveled, so it's a lot easier. Oh, there we go. So let's find that little tool in my toolkit. We used it the other day. There it is. And these offset spatulas, you can see it kind of goes like, it goes like that. Just makes it easier to spread. Just make sure you get the right size springform pan, because if it's too small, you won't have room for all the layers. You can see this is already nice and thick. There we go. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because another layer will go on top. There we go. Boom, boom, boom. And now we stick it in the freezer until it doesn't have to be solid, but until the top you can touch it and it won't, smush away, so that we can put the next layer on top. There's 2 more layers coming. All right, so now we're going to make the third out of the 4 layers of the frozen peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. Once again, using the food processor fitted with the S blade. You just want to make sure that the second layer is, it doesn't have to be frozen solid. You can see that I can push this in and get an indentation, but just solid enough that the peanut butter won't seep in. So it's very similar to the chocolate layer, but instead of melted chocolate, we are using peanut butter. So we have our 12.2, or is it 12.3 ounces of the Mori silken, very important, silken tofu, extra firm preferred, 1 cup of your non-dairy cream cheese, make it yourself or buy it. We have 1 full cup, it's actually 10 ounces of peanut butter. I always get unsalted, but I get roasted. Raw peanuts taste terrible if you ask me. You can make your own peanut butter. If you watch my television show, Healthy Living with Chef AJ, I believe it's episode 102 or 103, the one with Colin Campbell. I show you how to make your own peanut butter. It's very easy. And then we have 1 tablespoon of our alcohol-free vanilla and a full cup of date syrup. So let's put that all in the food processor. Date syrup is so thick and so yummy. All right, there we go. I don't recommend a blender for this recipe. Again, I always like to scrape the sides down at least once, and it really doesn't take very long to process. You just want to make sure you process it long enough that you don't have those little white flecks of tofu. Oh boy, does this smell good. Alrighty, so now we take our springform pan. Oh, if you could just smell this. Once I accidentally reversed the layers and had the peanut butter on the bottom, it still tasted good, but it just didn't look as pretty because I like going dark, light, dark, light. Now, when I make this, while the chocolate layer is setting up in the freezer, I actually make the peanut butter layer and I just put it in a dish in the refrigerator, and then when it's set up, it's already ready. And often I do the peanut butter layer first, even though it goes on second, because I don't have to clean the food processor, because it's okay if the chocolate layer gets made afterwards, because nobody will know, but you wouldn't want to reverse it. Always do your little trick. Get that blade spanking clean so you don't waste any. You'll see why this makes so much. That's why you need a bigger springform pan than just the 8-inch, or else it will just overflow the top. Ooh, it smells good, good, good. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Okay. There you go. You know, I know sometimes people say, well, can you use date paste for this? You know, you could, and I've done it, but it's just not the same texture. We're trying to get a real mousse-like, creamy, creamy texture. And, you know, the date paste is great for so many things. But for this, I do recommend the syrup, which, you know, you could make yourself as a pain in the butt because you got to reduce it. Very simple. Now all we have to do is wait for this layer to set up for a few hours in the freezer, and then we're going to put the final topping, and it's going to be done. This spectacular dessert, frozen peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. Ah, finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. Well, actually, this is not the moment you've been waiting for, because the moment you've been waiting for is when we actually unravel it and taste it. But it's time for the fourth and final layer. So once that third layer, you can touch it. You know, I mean, it's still not perfect because I can push it in. But when it's pretty good, a couple hours later, then we're going to make the final topping. And so in this pot, it's actually a saute pan, I have got 5 ounces of my chocolate chips, which is approximately 1 cup. I have half a cup of unsalted but roasted peanut butter, which is again about 5 ounces. And I have a 1/4 cup of my organic date syrup, which has no added sugar, and 1/8 of a cup, which is 2 tablespoons of a non-dairy milk, which is also unsweetened and without oil. So I am just going to melt this. I'm going to do it over medium heat. Again, you could do it over a double boiler. If this is not something you're proficient at, that's what I would recommend. I just don't have one anymore. And when it's nice and smooth, this is the final layer of the frozen peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. And I garnish it with some chopped, unsalted, but roasted peanuts. Going, wow, didn't take very long to melt down, did it?
That is
all right.
Awesome.
So
Wow.
once you get all the chocolate melted, peanut butter incorporated, wow. Turn this off, and now I want to work fairly quickly.
So it is okay to put that hot thing
yes,
on top of
if it's frozen enough. You don't
Right.
want to put hot on cold. If you had just done it, it would sink in. But it's been about 2 hours, and everybody's freezer's different. You know, at the restaurant we have what's known as a deep freeze, and boy, we could freeze things in, you know, 15, 20 minutes, but most houses don't have those. So, all right, once again, our trusty offset spatula. It's just so much easier. Wow, whoops, it's on my finger. Uh-oh. If you lick it off your finger, I guess those calories don't count, right?
No,
because they're
they
not eaten on a plate.
don't.
Used to do that in the old days, just smoothing around. Never cook when you're hungry, guys.
No.
Because then you end up tasting everything. Always be nice and full. Have that belly full of starch and veggies. So there we go. You know what? It doesn't have to be perfect, because we're going to sprinkle approximately a 1/4 cup of the chopped peanuts on top. And if you wanted to do just a pattern like around the ridge, you know, you could, but I usually just do it all the way over the top because the outside informs the inside. That way, if anybody did have a peanut allergy that you were unaware of at a party, they would know right away not to touch it or eat it. Whereas if it didn't have the peanuts on top, they might not know. Usually people with peanut allergies let everybody know because they have to. And again, you can do this with almonds. I've done it with raw almonds and almond butter, as much or as little as you like. And then we're going to pop it back in the freezer. Now this next layer does not take long to freeze because this chocolate will freeze up very quickly, and then we'll take it out and we'll show you what it looks like when it's done.
Very good.
So now the moment we've all been waiting for. The fourth and final layer has frozen nicely. And now I'm going to take it out of the pan. In this particular one, I showed you a few different styles of spring form. This one, you just kind of push up like this to get the big reveal. This is so heavy. Oh, it's so cold, too. I'm not even strong enough. There we go. It's coming. Come on. There we go. Woo-hoo. Look at that. I want to get it on a pretty plate. But in the meantime, Let's just give it a little cut. Ooh la 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 la.
Ooh.
Gustavo is so full. I don't know how he's going to eat this. And you know what? If it freezes, really, really hard, you just take it out for a few minutes before. Cut so nicely, but if you cut them bigger and then cut them in half, that would be a better thing. So go all the way to the crust. It tastes sort of like a cross between a cheesecake and an ice cream cake. And look at these beautiful, beautiful layers. Oh, boy. Now, that isn't the prettiest piece because he wanted it small. I'm going to cut a real piece for you guys and show you what it looks like. But I'm going to let him try this. This poor guy has had to eat dessert all day.
All day. So I cannot wait to have a salad.
That's right. He's craving salad now because of that.
But this is one more piece.
And he has never had any of my desserts, so there we go.
Mm.
Every layer is like a party in your mouth. There. Now,
AJ,
this is what it looks like when
you need an Oscar for dessert.
That's right. Now this is what it looks like, guys, when you cut it normal size. Look at that.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that.
Oh.
Look at this. This is just
pure
decadence.
Pure decadence.
The frozen peanut butter chocolate cheesecake. So of all the desserts that I ever created, and I've been making desserts since I was 7 years old, this is my absolute favorite because I am such a fan of mint in general, but specifically mint with chocolate, even more than with peanut butter. So I grew up in Chicago on the South Side, and every Saturday, my fondest memories are when my mother would take me to the department stores of department stores, Marshall Fields. We would always go to the 4th floor where they sold toys and clothes, but we would always have lunch there. And for dessert, I would always get a piece of Frango mint pie. Now, the only person I really know in the plant-based world that knows what I'm talking about is my friend Dr. Terry Mason, the urologist for the Cook County Medical System that was in the wonderful movie Forks Over Knives, who had one of my favorite lines: if it flaps a wing or wiggles a fin or something like that, don't eat it. So Frango Mint was a chocolate, I'm assuming it wasn't vegan, but I wasn't vegan in 1967, that was a mint chocolate. And at the time, they only had one flavor, chocolate mint. They've since developed other flavors. Marshall Fields has been sold, I believe, first to Dayton Hudson, then to Macy's. But at one point in the 80s, I believe, they had different flavors like lemon and coffee and things like that, and dark chocolate. But a Frango Mint was this candy bar that was just heaven, that you could just freeze and just like... If I know that I'm going to die for sure, and they still make them, that will be my last meal, is a Frango Mint. But anyway, this was just the most delicious candy I'd ever tasted. And in the restaurant only, they made this frozen pie that was like a Frango Mint. It's kind of like an ice cream pie, but it's just amazing. So never got the recipe, but it always stuck with me, these fond memories. And so I created a Frango Mint pie. It was a frozen pie with chocolate mint that tasted like it. Of course, was vegan without any refined sugar or flour. And this wasn't one of the bigger sellers at the restaurant, but it was my personal favorite. So let me show you how to make it. There's 3 steps to it, 3 different layers. So let's do the crust first. I'm using my springform pan, the silicone one where the side just peels off because I like it. I'm using the food processor fitted with the S blade because it looks like a letter S. And I'm starting with 2 cups of raw walnuts. Now, if for some reason you couldn't have walnuts, feel free to use another nut. I think that it wouldn't. I don't think peanuts would work. Pecans have more of a. I mean, pecans are good. That might work. More of a buttery taste. I think almonds would work, but they're kind of hard to process. So if you can have walnuts, use those. They're probably the healthiest nut if you're going to eat nuts anyway. What I'm doing now for the crust is very similar to my brawny recipe, a very popular recipe for unprocessed. However, I'm using a little bit less cocoa powder than the recipe calls for brownies because it's already going to be so rich on the other 2 layers. And I'm also going to be adding the mint. So I'm going to process these into a flour-like consistency. You never want to overprocess because then you'll get nut butter. I'm going to add 2 cups of pitted dates. If the date isn't pitted, it'll stop the blade, so you'll know. Sometimes even the pitted dates have pits. I'm using the organic Deglet Nor, I prefer these to the medjool in my recipes, partly because they're less sweet and partly because the medjool are so sticky. I don't know what's wrong with me today because I was supposed to add my cocoa powder first, but luckily I caught that. That's 1/4 cup of good quality cocoa powder or raw cacao. If you're doing brownies, do the full 1/2 cup. So every now and then I stop to check it. I have a really good hearing. As a matter of fact, me and Gustavo were shopping for a dress together because everybody thinks we're married anyway, for my high school reunion. And Gustavo was asking the shopkeep where he was from because he had a distinct accent, and Gustavo couldn't guess. And I said, Middle East? He goes, yes. And I said, Israel. So I heard that there was a pit. And sure enough, it was. You don't want that in there. Oftentimes, the pit gets caught on the blade and it will stop it. So just make sure you take it out very carefully. So let's start it up again. So all my crusts are similar. If there is a date pit, we will know when we try to press the crust. So the way you know it's ready is you get a little bit of a ball, you push it together. This could even, you could eat this. This could be a crust for anything. And then you break it apart. This is what I call the break point. When there's no crumbs, it's ready. Then and only then do you add your extracts, if using. Now, if you forget vanilla, which I did in the peanut butter one, the world's not going to come to an end. But since this is a mint chocolate cheesecake, you can't forget the mint in this one, or it won't be minty. So I have 1 tablespoon of alcohol-free vanilla and a 1/2 teaspoon of peppermint extract. Be very careful with mint extracts. They are very strong. Now, if you do use essential oils, my partner John Pierre sells wonderful ones by doTERRA. You can use those instead. Absolutely. They're food grade. They're edible. I just can't tell you how many drops. Because peppermint is great, but it can be overwhelming. So always err on the side of caution. The other thing is you want to use peppermint. You don't want to get mint extract because that's often spearmint and it tastes completely different. This is one of my favorites. So 1/2 teaspoon, not a lot. If you want it less minty, use 1/4. And just be sure that you don't add your liquids until you've reached that break point. So now I take the blade out and I dump it in my pan, which you could cover with a piece of parchment paper or wax paper if you don't want to have to clean it. And then, this is smells so good. And this could be a dessert unto itself. Now, if there was a date pit in there, we would see it now or feel it when we press, but there's not. And again, this can be a crust for anything. Just slice some fruit on it. So there we go. Very easy, very beautiful. And now we're going to stick this in the freezer before we show you how to make the filling. So now we're going to make layer number 2 of the Frango Mint Pie, which is a frozen mint chocolate delicacy. And if you're wondering why I'm using a dirty food processor, it's because I just used it for chocolate. It didn't have any mint in it, so it's okay. Like if I used it for mint, I wouldn't then go use it for peanut butter, but same ingredients, it's okay. And there was no extract in that one. So it's very similar to the second layer of the peanut butter chocolate cheesecake, except that we're going to be putting mint extract in, which changes it completely. So I have a 10-ounce bag of the Sunspire grain sweetened chocolate chips. And again, if you're using one with sugar, you may want to adjust the amount of date syrup. I'm using 3/4 of a cup. So as that melts, I'll put the remaining ingredients over here in my food processor fitted with the S blade. It's either 12.3 or 12.2 ounces of extra firm silken tofu, morinu. Very important not to use the water-packed tofu in dessert recipes. Yucky, yucky, yucky. 8 ounces of non-dairy cream cheese. I'm using the almond-based Miyoko's Creamery. If you can't find that, buy her book, Artisan Vegan Cheese, and make the recipe, or just use whatever non-dairy cream cheese you want, but preferably non-hydrogenated. 1/2 cup of a good quality cocoa powder, and A tablespoon of vanilla extract, and this time we're upping the mint. We put only a half a teaspoon in the crust to 1 teaspoon. And if you want it mintier, feel free to use a little bit more. If you want it less minty, feel free to use a little bit less. And also feel free to use your essential oils, but I can't tell you what the conversion is. So we'll go back over here and see what's happening. We're going to melt this very carefully. Be careful to watch it so that it doesn't scorch. Again, if you do get distracted and walk away and it scorches, don't try to use it. It will be, first of all, it won't work. It'll be all burned and it will just taste terrible. So always err on the side of caution when melting chocolate, carefully using a lower heat rather than a higher heat, and preferably using a double boiler. If you don't have a double boiler, you can make one simply by putting one pot on top of another pot. So it's almost melted. It doesn't take too long. There we go. And I'm going to try to get you guys a discount code for the date syrup so that you can do that. And what's great is they don't ship it in glass anymore, so it's a lot less expensive now that they've started using plastic. So this is almost completely incorporated and melted and nice and smooth. Very good. And now we bring it over to our food processor fitted with the S-blade. We have all the other ingredients in there. And bringing in all the chocolate. There we go. If you love chocolate, this is the webinar for you, because every webinar is chocolate. You know, the cacao bean, which is what chocolate is made for, actually used to be used as currency in the Aztec civilization. So it's always a good idea to scrape down your food processor. Sometimes that cream cheese sticks. I'm smelling it because I want it to be minty enough. And you want to taste this and tell me if it's minty enough? Because this is the thing, you know, mint is, I mean, I don't want it to be overpowering, but I want it, and you can tell people what this tastes like. It's not frozen yet, but is it minty enough? Is it too sweet? Is it sweet enough?
For me, it is minty.
Perfect. You can taste the mint without it being like, whoa,
right.
Like a breath mint.
I mean, some people might like a little more.
Right. So that's, I try to err on the side of not as much because you never know. Okay.
And it's very good.
Yeah. Okay. You could serve this like this, I suppose, but wait till it's frozen. So now we're going to pour this. I mean, chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. If you are a chocolate lover.
Yeah, that's for me.
I probably could have processed this a little bit more. I see a little bit of graininess in this, but oh well. We don't want you guys to have to wait, even though you have to wait for it to set up. And once again, that trick that I've showed you so many times before, whether you're making hummus or filling, always do a quick process, centrifugal force at work here so that you can, oh, now I smell the mint. That's so good. And I think by adding the vanilla with the mint, it just kind of bumps up the mint. You know, vanilla is the second most expensive spice in the world, Gustavo. You know what the first one is?
Is it saffron?
It is saffron, absolutely. And you know, more of the vanilla in this country goes to ice cream, to make vanilla ice cream, than anything else. So please don't chintz on your extracts. Do not get imitation extracts. They're made out of sulfites, and I mean, my understanding is that artificial vanilla is a byproduct of the wood industry, so you don't want to use artificial even though it's cheaper. No, you want to use artificial anything. So now we take our trusty offset spatula. This is going to be covered, and you can see, guys, do as I say, not as I do. Those little white flecks you see are tofu that I didn't process enough. So when you're doing that, it'll taste fine, but you don't want to do that to your company, right? Take the time to do it right, which I don't do. Being an impulsive Aries, I do everything in a hurry. I even sleep fast. Okay, there we go. Beautiful. There's going to be one more chocolate mint layer on top. So we're going to pop that in the freezer, and as soon as it's hard, we're going to, it doesn't have to be perfectly hard, just hard enough so I can put the melted chocolate mint mixture on top, put it in the freezer, not the refrigerator, and we'll come back and show you the final layer. So now I want to show you how to make the third and final layer, the topping for our mint frozen cheesecake. I call it the Frango mint torte, but if you're not from Chicago, you don't know what that means. It doesn't have to be completely frozen. It just has to be, you know, not smushy so that the thing will sink in. This is fine. This is not ready to eat yet, but you can see, boom, 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 it's fine. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I have 5 ounces of the grain sweetened Sunspire chocolate chips, and then I am adding 1/4 cup of non-dairy milk to it. And I'm using medium heat. You can certainly do this over a double boiler. Always want to move it around using your spatula. And what's going to mint it up is 1/2 teaspoon of our delicious peppermint extract. And again, feel free to add more mint, less mint, or no mint, but then it won't be a Frango mint dessert. Again, you can use your peppermint essential oils. I don't know what the ratio is, though, of that. You might want to ask John Pierre. He sells the doTERRA, a very fine brand, which I use for many reasons, but so far have not used for cooking. So we just want to get this nice and smooth so that we can spread it on top. Ooh, look at that. Perfecto. I probably could have gone with a little bit less than 1/4 cup, which would have been not 1/8 of a cup, but 3/16 of a cup. But I think this is probably, that's a good consistency. Definitely not more than 1/4 cup. So don't eyeball this. Certain things you can eyeball, but in baking, I really suggest you read the recipe not once, not twice, but thrice, and have everything set up. Perfect, perfect, nice smooth texture. Now we are going to pour it over the top. That's why it has to be at least partially frozen, or you'll just have a big old sinking mess of hot chocolate, which probably tastes good, but it won't be as pretty. So let's get every bit. And again, this is why you need your offset spatula, guys. Oh, look at that. Just, oh, is that beautiful? I think so. We got a little bit of an imperfection here. You know, it's so funny because I know that I'll get a migraine. I'm not even tempted. You know, in the old days, I would have licked at my finger, but it smells so good. So we are just going to let this nice glossiness go like this. You could even, do a little, not a design, but do some, what do you think, Gustavo? Some nibs, or just leave it? Nibs will make it crunchy. Not everybody wants that crunch. So
just leave it.
Yeah, let's just leave it. It's going to be beautiful. So what I would do is when I serve it, I would take a nice fresh mint leaf, which I'll show you once we do have this completely frozen, and take pictures and show you how I might serve it on a plate. But again, you could, see, I'm just making this up as I go along. It's actually been years since I've made this dessert. What if I took a fork and just went like this, or like this, or like this, or like this? It would just kind of sink in a little bit. Feel free to make it as pretty as you want. That would be nice, huh? What if I went all the way around the edge? There we go. There's no right or wrong answer. Making lines. We have to do this while it's, before it firms up, though. Maybe a line like this. It's up to you. Or just keep it smooth. Beautiful. All right, stick it back in the freezer. Yum, yum. So now our frozen Frango mint pie is ready to be looked at. Now this particular springform pan is a little bit different than some. It's got this little plastic clip that you just pull up. My hand's a little bit cold. You just kind of push it up or pull it up. Boom. And look how easy, guys. You just unwind it. Woo, woo, woo. Somebody can lick that. And then I like to take a little spatula and loosen it from the glass. Loosen it all the way around is probably a good idea. And I just realized sprinkling it with mini chocolate chips might have been pretty, had I had any, if you worry about that. And then we're going to place it there. And I don't know if Gustavo is able to taste any more stuff today, but
I'll taste a little.
Yes, so take one for the team. Let me get a piece of mint for the garnish. I have it because I bought some.
So what were the 3 layers here again?
Well, they're all minty and they're all chocolatey, so they're all a little bit different.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but they're all chocolate mint. Let me get a piece of fresh mint for the...
But it is technically a cheesecake?
Well, it's cheesecake-like. You know, I call it a Frango mint tort. But yeah, I would say it's more like a cheesecake. But it's not going to be cheesy. It's going to be chocolatey and minty. So let's... Oh, look at that. Look how beautifully that cuts. And if your freezer is colder than mine and it doesn't cut easily, you can just defrost it a few minutes. Now, this is very, very, very rich.
Very.
And so... poor Gustavo already had to eat a piece of German chocolate cake, so I don't want to...
No.
Oh, beautiful. And then what I like to do, and what we did at the restaurant, is we would just take some fresh mint like that, and we would serve this. Is this not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? Look at that, you guys.
So now...
So he's going to taste it, because you know what they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Yummy, yummy.
Okay.
You've never had this before.
I have never
Actually,
had
hardly
this.
anybody has had
And I
this.
probably will never have it.
Never have it again. You have to eat that whole piece.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
Mm.
It's delicious. This is my favorite. This was my favorite dessert of
I
all
think
the desserts.
this is definitely...
Yeah, this is high end, guys. Marshall Fields, if you are still open.
Magnifique.
It's delicious.
Delicioso.
Frango mint pie.
Frango mint pie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everyone. This is amazing.
Thanks. Yeah. So now I'm going to show you a bonus recipe, a coconut pecan shortbread cookie. Now it uses a dehydrator, so don't be all writing me, you're upset you don't have a dehydrator. It's a bonus recipe. We weren't going to include it in this master pastry class because it's technically not a pastry. It's not something I made at the restaurant. But I had mentioned in the German chocolate cake recipe when I made the frosting some possible other uses for the frosting. One of them was to coat an apple to make a caramel apple. Well, here's another way to use it. Now, please don't ask me if you can cook my dehydrated recipes in an oven, because I'm going to tell you no, because they don't work. They were created for the dehydrator. A dehydrator dries. It's just a fan that blows. It never gets higher than about 160 degrees. An oven cooks at high temperature. It bakes. It cooks with heat. And I don't know any oven that gets lower than about 250. You know, and they say you have to crack the door. It's terrible for things like kale chips. I mean, when I've tried the dehydrated recipes in ovens, it just burns. It doesn't cook through. And the whole purpose for me for dehydrating is because I travel. Sometimes I'm gone for 5 weeks at a time. And baked recipes, they're not going to stay fresh in my suitcase, but dehydrated recipes, they can last for a year. And I happen to like things super duper crunchy. It's not going to happen in the oven, not when you're cooking or baking without oil. So remember, a bonus recipe, dehydrator. You weren't going to get this at all, so don't be all complaining in my face about it, all right? So, Shada actually invented this, and I kind of put my spin on it. Shada's the gal that lost over 100 pounds 5 years ago in the Ultimate Weight Loss Program and has kept it off because she was making the German chocolate cake for Yom Kippur. I mean, that makes no sense because you fast on Yom Kippur, but when you break the fast to bring to company's house, she had a little bit of extra frosting. So what she decided to do was put in some oats and dehydrate, and she made some granola, or raw granola, which actually was crackola because I tried it once, never again. It's really hyper palatable. My husband loves it. So I took her basic idea, but then I added more oats because it really was really sweet. And instead of doing it like granola, I shaped it like cookies. We start off by making the date paste. And in my food processor fitted with the S-Blade, I have 1 pound of dates that I soaked in 8 ounces of water. If you want the soaking to go faster, use boiling water. There we go. I have already measured off. You want to have a nice big bowl because you got to really mix. 8 ounces, which is half as much as 16 ounces, which is a pound of dates, 8 ounces of unsweetened flaked coconut, and 8 ounces of raw or roasted but unsalted pecan. And these are always chopped fine. I usually just go to Costco and buy the 2-pound bags of raw pecans and chop them myself. It ends up being less expensive. So now I'm going to mix the date paste in. And basically right now, what you're seeing me do is what you saw me do when I made the German chocolate cake frosting. It's just a little bit different ratio. This is not quite enough to frost a 3-layer cake, but it's the same principle so far, same ingredients, because that's how the recipe was created. By repurposing, just going to get that last bit off the blade. Don't you love this trick? My sister-in-law Lauren in Pittsburgh taught me this, and it has saved me so much money on ingredients. So I'm just going to get every bit. And again, date paste will last for months in your freezer and probably even in your refrigerator. So I just recommend you make 2 pounds of it and just use it and throw out all that crappy maple syrup and agave and stevia and barley malt and molasses and succinate and all that stuff. It's all crap. And again, so now I have this in here, and what I'm going to do is mix it with my hands like I did for the frosting. I find that if I put the oats in too soon, I don't get a good enough mix. So I did that once, and boy, was I sorry, because it really created a lot of extra work for me. So again, feel always free to use latex-free food service gloves. Always wash your hands. All right, so there we go. Very easy, very easy. So I'm just going to get most of it off my hand, and then I'm going to wash or rinse my hands. I hate that I wasted even that much. So now I am going to add 1 pound of oats. I am using gluten-free oats. I really like the more toothsome, extra thick cut if you can find them where you live, but it's not necessary. And now remixing again. This time I'm going to keep a hand out of it so that I can dry. But you really, what I like using my hand better than a spatula, because I'm using it like a claw, because I'm really trying to get those oats in. Because the original recipe from Shada didn't use quite as many oats, which was fine, but it was just too sweet. It is still very, very sweet. You know, dates are something like 70% sugar. So if you're a diabetic, I don't recommend them at all. And if you're trying to lose weight, I don't recommend dates at all. They're still 1,300 calories a pound, which is more than 6 times as calorically dense as whole fruit. But man, if you're trying to get off sugar, I have so many clients that are just such bad sugar addicts, and they don't want to go sugar-free overnight, so they use dates like I did, kind of as methadone. And there's nothing wrong with dates. They're a whole natural food. But, you know, they're calorically dense, and they can be a problem for some people because they'll overeat on them. So there we go. Still rather see people use dates than any kind of real or fake sugar, though, because at least it's real food. It's found in nature. You know, xylitol and erythritol and stevia, these aren't foods, guys. These are science experiments. So don't listen to people that tell you they're healthy, because they're worse for you than sugar. Because when you eat things like stevia and xylitol and erythritol that are not found in nature, that are highly processed, first of all, you can't make them in your own kitchen. But second of all, see, our tongue is designed to taste sweet. We have taste buds on the tip of our tongue for sweet and salty. And that was nature's way of ensuring we got enough calories, that the ripe berries were the ones that were sweet and the poisonous ones were generally not. But anyway, when our tongue tastes sweet, our brain gets really excited that we're going to get fed and we're going to get a calorie reward. Well, sugar, as unhealthy as it might be, is 4 calories per gram. Stevia, xylitol, erythritol, these things have no calories. So what happens is the brain gets all excited and the tummy gets all excited thinking food's going to come, but the calories don't come. And so what happens is you end up getting hungrier. So if you're using stevia, xylitol, and erythritol, if you don't have GI problems, you might develop them because they're a GI nightmare, according to all the gastroenterologists, but also they just perpetuate the desire to eat more sweet. And as long as you're eating those fake sugars, you're never going to neuroadapt to the taste of whole natural food. So there we go. I'm going to rinse my hand again. And now I'm going to make the cookies. So what we're going to use is a dehydrator. And I use the Excalibur 9 tray, which has never been more affordable. I believe it's $179 now with free shipping on Amazon. I paid much more for mine many years ago. Now, I just want to kind of show you like how to flip it, because we're not going to be able to flip it now because it takes a few hours to dehydrate. Maybe we will, depending on how long we're shooting. But let's just say this was your cookie, okay? So let's say you have your cookie on your sheet right here. So what you do is, in this case, since it's not going to be wet, all you have to do is when it's dry to the touch, you gotta dry it on the screen and you flip it over. But if you wanted to, you could take another dehydrator sheet and flip it over like that, and then you have it already flipped over, if that makes sense, okay? So, and you probably could just dry it right on the screen without the Teflex, but since it is a little bit wet to start, I think it's better to do that. So, cookie scoops come in a variety of sizes. This is a large, this is a medium. I can't seem to find my small right now, so I'm going to use the medium.
Those are cookie scoops, or they're not ice cream.
They're ice cream scoops or cookie scoops. You can
okay.
use them for both. So what I like to do, what's perfect for me, is to just take this amount, and then I still use my hand, and I kind of just press it down, and this makes a perfect cookie. And I get about 30 of them on this tray. So I'm not going to do the whole tray right now because I don't want to bore you guys, but I think you get the idea of what I'm doing. You could make them bigger, you could make them smaller. If you didn't want to take the time to shape them into cookies, you could certainly just do the granola, spread it there. Now, one of the things you can do, if I don't have the small scoop, but you could even just make little balls like this. Delicious. I'm going to show you what these look like because that's how I make it for my husband. If you notice that it's not sticking, like some of the cookie part is falling apart, one of two things needs to happen. You need to either use a little bit more date paste, which I actually have in my, in my refrigerator, or put in a little bit less oats. But I'm not going to finish that right now, but I'm going to show you what to do if you want to make them into cute little balls. I got these tin for my husband for Valentine's Day. Charles loves these. He likes to eat them like cereal with almond milk. And so what I did is I made them into balls, but then I rolled them in the unsweetened coconut. Now these are really hard. That's how I like to dehydrate things so they'll last. So if you have dental work or a bridge or problems, then either dehydrate them less or soak them in non-dairy milk, and they're quite delicious, and I know Gustavo's been enjoying them while he's been here. So that's our bonus recipe, coconut pecan shortbread cookies.